Hello, friends. If you're curious about the movie Corpse Bride, released in 2005, you're in the perfect place. Don't forget to give this video a quick like, it really helps us out. And if you're new here, hit subscribe to stay updated on all the latest movie deep dives. Let's jump right in. In a fog-draped village of cobblestone streets and gaslit lamps, Victor Van Dort takes trembling steps toward a future he scarcely dared to imagine. The son of fish merchants, unskilled at polite society, he stands before a grand manor to marry into aristocracy, and almost faints at the prospect. Through his stuttered vows flows a nervous hope, a longing to belong. Yet when he hesitates over the final words, practicing his promise in the moonlit graveyard, he sets in motion a chain of events more astounding than any fairy tale. There, beneath a crooked willow, his wedding ring glitters on a decaying bone. With a gasp unfit for the living, he slides it onto a skeletal finger and awakens her. She rises from the earth's dark velvet, her eyes alight with longing. Once the bride of a groom lost to tragedy, she believed her apology would bring him back, only to find herself toying with the living. His startled grin, her gleeful welcome, their dance amid headstones. These first meetings swirl with eerie romance, the graveyard's lamplight weaving blue and silver threads of possibility. Summoned back to the realm of the living, Victor carries his betrothed's ring, unwittingly pledged to the bride of the Underworld. At home, his true fiancée, Victoria, waits behind lace curtains, her heart fluttering at every knock. She hears only a borrowed ring's echo in his apology, unaware of the spectral fiancé haunting his shadow. As Victor balances dawn-chased secrets and moonlit promises, the village stirs. A frumpy matchmaker chafes at her waning powers, a stork advisor croons of social graces, and each silent glance in Victorian parlors pulses with unspoken tremors. But below, in the underworld's jeweled caverns, the skeletal bride twirls in ghostly finery, a waltz of longing and despair. Her laughter, soft as wind through crypts, mingles with the sighs of lost souls, weaving a tapestry of bittersweet devotion. For in that realm, love blooms eternal, and even the deepest darkness cannot erase a bride's vow. As dawn and dusk entwine across two worlds, Victor must choose: honor the living promise he barely understands, or fulfill the ancient bond carved in bone. Shadows shift, candles gutter, and beneath every polished floorboard lies the pulse of a hidden heart. Amid elaborate ballrooms and spectral ballads, the final choice trembles on a knife's edge. Will Victor's hand find warmth, or will he dance forever in the pale glow of a corpse bride's morning light? Victor Van Dort opened his eyes to the soft glow of dawn filtering through lace curtains, the haze of an unsettling dream clinging to his mind. His heart fluttered as he recalled the whispered vows he had practiced the night before, words meant to bind him to a new life among the nobility. Clumsy fingers traced the polished ring he held, a promise that felt heavier than mercury, and he rose on trembling legs, determined to master each syllable before the grand ceremony. Downstairs, the Van Dort household stirred with nervous excitement. Mrs. Van Dort fussed over her son's waistcoat, smoothing every crease with maternal precision, while Mr. Van Dort hovered like an anxious sea captain, handing his son a glass of water and murmuring awkward encouragement. "Remember, Victor," he said, voice wavering with pride and fear, "it's just words. Speak them true." Victor offered a grateful if shaky smile, tucked the ring into his waistcoat pocket, and stepped into the morning's brittle light, unaware that fate had already reached for his heart. The carriage ride to the Everglot estate was a blur of fields and distant hills, trimmed by hedgerows that seemed to bow in silent blessing. Victor's stomach twirled as the carriage wheels crunched over the gravel forecourt, and the great wrought-iron gates swung open to reveal the mansion's facade, a gilded promise of grandeur. Inside, the hush of polished floors and the glitter of chandeliers swallowed him. Portraits of stern ancestors lined the walls, their painted eyes following his every move as he approached the grand hall. At its center stood Lord Everglot, an imposing figure in black, and beside him, Lady Everglot offered a perfumed smile as delicate as spun sugar. Between them, Victoria Everglot sat with the grace of moonlight, pale cheeks, soft curls, her eyes lifting to meet Victor's with a warm welcome that both soothed and unnerved him. With knees knocking behind starched linen, Victor recited the carefully crafted words, "With this ring I thee wed." They fell from his lips haltingly but true, each syllable echoing through the vaulted ceiling in a symphony of obligation. Victoria's hand trembled as she placed her own ring upon his finger. In that instant, the hall held its breath, and the orchestra poised for the first chord of celebration. But later that day, beneath a sky painted in bruised purples, Victor found himself alone in the old graveyard beyond the Everglot grounds. He had come to steel himself for the evening's reception, to practice the final vow that still tangled on his tongue. He knelt before the mossy stones, the air thick with the scent of damp earth, and slipped the wedding ring onto a skeletal finger peeking through the soil. Dawn's promise seemed a lifetime away as he closed his eyes and uttered the vow once more, only to feel a cold hand close around his own. Eyes snapping open, he stared into a face pale as moonlight. She rose from the ground like a blossom of bone and sorrow, wide, longing eyes set above lips curved in a smile that both beckoned and betrayed. Her gown, tattered yet elegant, shimmered with the faintest glow as she extended a hand, urging him into a dance among the tombstones. His horror clenched his chest, but curiosity beckoned. In that silent waltz, their souls brushed across the centuries, his living heart beating against the quiet echo of hers. When he awoke, dawn had broken. The fog lifted, revealing only empty earth and the ring lying cold upon the grass. Victor stumbled toward the manor, panic thrumming through every step. At the reception that evening, he found himself clutching the ring like a talisman, his reflection in every window warping with memories of her gaze. Victoria watched him with concern, catching his hand in a gentle question as servants offered champagne and laughter swirled like gilded petals. Night after night, the dreams returned. He saw her in reflections, on polished mirrors, in the sheen of silver trays, even in the fleeting glint of a candle-thin glass. Each vision lingered a heartbeat too long, until he dared no surface unchecked. When at last he confessed to Victoria, her compassion anchored him, yet it carried the tremor of doubt. Together they sought counsel from the matchmaker's aunt, who whispered of ancient promises and restless brides. Her warnings echoed in the hush of the mansion's corridors. Some vows, once uttered, bind more than the living world can contain. By candlelight in his chambers, Victor pored over the old family journals, tomes of grief and ghostly lore. Among them, a brittle ledger spoke of a bride betrayed, her body laid to rest in the very graveyard he had wandered. In her despair, she vowed that no living groom would escape her grasp. Victor's throat tightened as the last entry trailed into a splatter of ink. "He will dance with me beyond the veil, or none shall live to wed." Determination sharpened within him. At dusk he returned to the willow's shadow, clutching a lantern and repeating the vow that might set her free. From the earth she emerged, radiant and sorrowful. But this time Victor met her with gentle firmness, speaking her name, Emilia, a name he had discovered in the journals. His voice, trembling yet true, offered her the apology decades in coming. "I do not belong to your world, but I honor your weight." In her eyes, the grin softened, the bone rang with a hollow echo of relief, and she faded into moonlit dust. When he rose at dawn again, the earth lay undisturbed. The wedding ring was gone, returned to its bone cradle. At the reception, Victor approached Victoria with new confidence. Not just a promise learned, but a promise earned through trials beyond reckoning. Her eyes filled with both joy and unasked questions as he took her hand and spoke the vow in a voice clear as morning. As they danced beneath crystal chandeliers, the air felt lighter, the ancestral portraits gazed down without reproach, and the promise of a life bound in love outshone even the lingering memory of the corpse bride's moonlit grace. Victor awoke with his heart hammering, the echoes of Emily's plea still reverberating in his mind. Dawn's pale light seeped through the lace curtains, painting delicate patterns across the floorboards. He rubbed his eyes, his gaze catching the faded rose of his wedding coat discarded on the chair, and remembered the funeral dirge that had ushered him through the underworld's gates. In the living world, a bride awaited him down the aisle, In the realm below, a ghostly wife mourned her betrayal and begged for his devotion. His chest tightened as he slipped from bed, determination stirring alongside the ache of divided vows. He hurried through hallways that still bore faint traces of moonlit fog, each portrait and gilded frame a silent witness to the confusion his heart carried. Outside, the Everglot mansion stood proud beneath a sky unmarred by spectral lamplight. Victoria, her skirts rustling like whispers of innocence, waited at the grand doorway, her hand pressed to her heart as she caught sight of him. Relief and love mingled in her eyes, and he forced his own smile, hiding the guilt that threatened to burst through. Their mourning ceremony would bind them forever, he hoped, and with every vow, he prayed to sever the bond that rooted him to bones beneath the willow. Inside the chapel, candles flickered along pews carved with cherubs and vines. Victoria's father presided over the hush, offering gentle words as Victor swallowed hard and slipped Victoria's ring onto her finger. The congregation murmured approval, their faces alight with joy. Yet Victor's hands trembled. Each syllable of their renewed vows felt like an echo through catacombs, reminding him of Emily's hollow promise below. As he pledged his heart, a sudden gust of wind rattled the stained-glass windows, images of saints and angels trembling in reprieve. Victoria glanced toward the pane, confusion flickering in her eyes, but the ceremony pressed on, drowning the termite sound of his conscience. The reception that followed unfolded in music and laughter. Guests twirled beneath lanterns hung from oak tree branches, and crystal glasses chimed as toasts rose to life. Victor danced with Victoria, her laughter like silver bells, and for a precious moment he believed he could outrun the shadow that clung to him. Yet every reflective surface, a polished silver tray, a gilded mirror behind the bar, revealed a flicker of moonlight behind his eyes. There, in each shimmer, he saw Emily's face, her sorrowful smile beckoning him back to her domain. When the clock struck midnight, he slipped away, leaving Victoria dancing in the arms of her new husband's absence. Emerging into the cool night air, Victor navigated the rose gardens until he reached the old graveyard's wrought iron gate. The earth there lay still, but the soil beneath the willow pulsed with the breath of the beneath world. He knelt before Emily's grave, his voice raw in the quiet hush. "Forgive me," he whispered, placing Victoria's wedding band atop the mound of earth. His breath hitched as the soil trembled, and from its darkness rose Emily's pale hand, slipping the ring from the ground and pressing it to her chest. Her hollow eyes held no anger, only longing that cut deeper than any dagger. He leaned forward, touching the damp soil, praying for a way to free them both. Back at the mansion, Victoria paced the moonlit halls, her gown rustling as if caught in a storm's eddy. She felt the shift in the wind, a reed of fear in her chest that surpassed any cold draught. Her father found her by a portrait of an Everglot bride long past, her lips painted red yet forever silent. "Vic," he murmured, concern etching his brow. "Are you well?" She nodded, forcing composure, but her eyes flicked toward the hallway mirror, where her reflection rippled for a heartbeat, showing not her sky-blue eyes but a pair of sorrow-shadowed sockets. She spun away, clutching the back of a gilded chair, and whispered, "Something is wrong." Meanwhile, beneath the earth, Emily led Victor through limestone tunnels lit by phosphorescent moss. Her skeletal fingers brushed his hand as she guided him to the grand banquet hall of the dead, columns of bone reaching skyward into vaults of darkness. Ghostly waltzes echoed through the cavern, and the resurrected guests moved in mournful procession around a dais where Victor had once stood. There, they presented him with a skeletal crown and a scepter carved from driftwood. "Our king," they intoned in voices like wind through reeds, beckoning him to claim his throne beside Emily. His heart shattered at the sight. He thought of Victoria's gentle smile, her warm embrace, the life they might share in sunlit halls. He thought of Emily's tragic past, her abandoned wedding, the love that had turned to sorrow. Rising from the dais, he removed the crown and scepter, his voice echoing through the chamber. "I belong to neither realm alone," he declared, defiance and heartbreak woven into each syllable. The dead halted their dance, their hollow heads tilting as if surprised by his choice. Above, In the living world, Victoria and her father raced through the moonlit gardens. She reached the willow's edge, her skirts brushing dew-soaked grass. Placing her palm against the ancient trunk, she whispered Victor's name. The earth trembled, soil shifting around the buried ring. She watched in awe as the ground cracked, revealing bone and blossom entwined. With trembling fingers, she retrieved the skeletal finger upon which her band once lay, and instantly the ground stilled. In her heart, she knew Victor would come. Back below, Victor led Emily to the great archway linking the worlds. A swirl of mist, blue as grief, gathered at the portal's threshold. Emily's gown fluttered, her eyes glistening with ancient tears. "Stay," she pleaded, her voice a hollow melody. "I waited a lifetime for your embrace." Victor knelt, touching her cool cheek. The earth trembled, soil shifting around the buried ring. She watched in awe as the ground cracked, revealing bone and blossom entwined. With trembling fingers, she retrieved the skeletal finger upon which her band once lay, and instantly the ground stilled. In her heart, she knew Victor would come. Back below, Victor led Emily to the great archway linking the worlds. A swirl of mist, blue as grief, gathered at the portal's threshold. Emily's gown fluttered, her eyes glistening with ancient tears. "Stay," she pleaded, her voice a hollow melody. "I waited a lifetime for your embrace." Victor knelt, touching her cool cheek. "You will always be part of me," he whispered, "but I cannot bind my heart to sorrow alone." He pressed a gentle kiss to her brow, and with his other hand he touched the swirling mist. The air crackled as Victoria emerged from the earth, her hand brushing Victor's shoulder. "I love you," she breathed, stepping into the glow of the portal. Emily's bones rattled with sorrow, her grin softening to a final, bright curve of acceptance. She placed Victor's hand in Victoria's, guiding her across the threshold into the moonlit cemetery. As they emerged, Victor and Victoria embraced under the willow's branches, two souls finally united by truth rather than obligation. With that, the portal collapsed in a shimmer of silver dust, sealing the path between worlds. Emily's silhouette flickered once more, her mournful smile echoing through the leaves, and then she was gone. Victor knelt to gather Emily's buried ring one last time, slipping it into his coat pocket, a silent tribute to love tempered by sacrifice. Victoria rose to his side, her hand warm in his, and together they walked back toward the mansion's lights, hearts entwined in the living world's promise of tomorrow. At dawn, as the first sunbeams gilded the manor's spires, Victor and Victoria stood beneath the portico, hand in hand. Guests emerged onto balconies, their cheers carried on the breeze. The skeletal ring lay on a silver tray at the foot of the willow, buried once more until sorrow's bones would rest entirely. And in Victor's eyes and Victoria's smile, the promise of a new life glowed brighter than any spectre's mournful grin, a testament that love, once forged in the shadows, can find its truest form in the light of day. He awoke each morning with the weight of uncertainty pressing against his ribs, as though his heart had yet to learn the shape of his own reflection. Victor Van Dort carries himself like a man shaped of candlelight and nerves, tall and awkward in his stately coat, hands perpetually stained with the ink of his father's ledgers. At his core lies a tender heart riddled with doubt. He trembles before a symphony, trips on his own feet in the drawing-room, and stumbles through words meant to bind him to another's life. Yet within that trembling beats a courage few possess, the courage to love despite fear, to honor a promise forged in the most unlikely of places. It is his instinctive decency that sets the story's compass. For every faltered vow to Victoria, there is an equal desire to make right the unintended pledge to Emily. In the flicker of his stutter, we see a young soul learning that sincerity, raw and unpolished, can illuminate the darkest of worlds. Victoria Everglot embodies quiet strength beneath the fragile beauty of painted porcelain. Raised amid the rustling silk of aristocracy, she learned early that obedience is lauded and willful spirit is hushed. Yet her gentle manners conceal an iron resolve. When Victor falters, she does not recoil but reaches for his hand, her touch steadying him in ways no whispered counsel could. Her eyes, the color of rain-softened slate, reflect kindness without condescension, empathy without pity. In her songs at the reception, her voice a trembling star, she channels both joy and heartbreak, signaling that vulnerability can be a gift rather than a curse. Watching her, one understands that true partnership demands not perfection but the grace to stand firmly alongside another's flaws. Emily, the corpse bride, moves through her underworld in a dance of moonlit grace, the shattered tendrils of her wedding gown brushing dust-laden stones. Beneath her hollow ribs beats a heart still reverberating with abandoned hope. In life, she was a child caught between love and betrayal, a promise broken so deep that it echoed beyond death's threshold. Her hair, once spun gold, now drapes in spectral waves. Her eyes, though empty of flesh, gleam with undying devotion. In her welcome to Victor, those first tremulous embraces beneath the willow's boughs, she reveals the purity of a love that transcends mortality. Yet within her spectral laughter lies a sorrow so profound it hums through the earth itself. Emily's tale reminds us that the truest bonds can become prison, and that forgiveness, no matter how delayed, can set even the heaviest spirits free. Lord Everglot stands at the nexus of tradition and expectation, his silver hair combed back like frost across a still lake. His every syllable, polished and precise, carries the weight of generations, of estates maintained and alliances forged in the hush of drawing-rooms. Beneath his austere veneer pulses a protective pride, a desire to see his daughter wed with dignity rather than despair. Though he regards Victor's awkward stumbles with a critical eye, he is not without compassion. His clenched fists loosen when Victoria's laughter rings through the hall, and in private, he loosens his tie to whisper regrets over lost love in his own past. He embodies the burden of legacy, the conflict between duty and the heart's quiet urgings. Lady Everglot, draped in pastel silks and perfect pearls, wears optimism like a costume, her smile as rehearsed as a porcelain doll's. Yet behind that bright gaze flickers the weary embers of a woman who knows that hope must be renewed each morning. She champions the match between Victor and Victoria as though it were her own fulfillment, arranging every lace detail and curtsying before the assembled guests. Still, in gilded corridors and candlelit parlors, mirrors sometimes reveal her longing for a chance not taken, a dance partner lost to time. She is the living testament to resilience, the will to paint cheer across every circumstance, even when sorrow lies just beneath the surface. Burton slinks through the story in a swirl of silken coats and whispered promises, his smile a razor hidden behind courtesy. His willingness to help Victor learn the art of etiquette masks an ambition that binds him to Emily's fate. In every low bow and private invitation, he trades on vulnerabilities, offering guidance while weaving webs of deception. His polished cane taps out a rhythm of calculated steps, and his eyes gleam with the thrill of control. He embodies the perils of charm without conscience, a reminder that charisma, like the finest veil, can conceal the deepest betrayals. Magistrate Trigg, the kindly stork perched in the matchmaker's nest, doles out advice as if it were confectionery, sweet morsels of humor wrapped around stern counsel. His spindly legs carry him through parlor and garden alike, his every pronouncement sprinkled with wit. He observes love's awkward blooms with the fondness of an elder bird, offering guidance without judgment. In his presence, the story finds lightness amid its shadows, a reminder that laughter can itself be an act of defiance against despair. Burkiss's loyal but harried henchman, the keeper of the keys. He observes love's awkward blooms with the fondness of an elder bird, offering guidance without judgment. In his presence, the story finds lightness amid its shadows, a reminder that laughter can itself be an act of defiance against despair. Burkiss's loyal but harried henchman, the keeper of the keys, lumbers through the Everglot estate like a reluctant ghost, his chains rattling with each exasperated sigh. Tasked with securing both living and departed hearts, he carries incense and lanterns through midnight halls, his gruff voice offering warnings half-heeded by both the living bride and her corpse counterpart. Beneath his grumbling exterior, he harbors empathy for each runaway bride he escorts, witness to their tears, guardians of their unspoken fears. He stands as the silent witness to folly and redemption alike, his keys jingling with the promise of both release and imprisonment. In the tapestry of their intertwined lives, these characters breathe with narrative purpose. Victor's vulnerability finds balance in Victoria's steadfast grace. Emily's haunting devotion sheds light on the power of promises, while Lord and Lady Everglot's stately concerns echo the weight of expectation. Burkiss's silk-woven deceit and the magistrate's avian wit remind us that ambition and humor roost side by side in the nest of destiny. Through every glance cast across candlelit floors, every whispered confession in moonlit graveyards, the film's story unfolds upon their souls, weaving a timeless dance of love, loss, and the unbreakable bonds that tether us all, whether flesh or bone, to the promises we hold dear. The air in the dimly lit studio felt charged, a hush hanging over every shelf where painted puppets stood like silent sentinels. It was in this cocoon of stillness that the heartbeat of Corpse Bride was born, each frame a testament to the painstaking devotion of artists and animators. Tim Burton's world of twisted romance and shadowed whimsy seeped into every corner, shaping a tale that would feel at once familiar and utterly uncanny. Beneath the veneer of Victorian gravestones and moonlit ballrooms lay a wealth of strange truths, secrets whispered only in the creak of wooden armatures and the soft sigh of passing breath as each puppet came alive. Victor Van Dort's first trembling steps into the graveyard were more than an actor's debut. They marked the triumph of a revolutionary technique. Rather than swapping entire puppet heads to catch expressions, the crew engineered a complex lattice of tiny LEDs and gears inside each skull. These hidden lights flickered through translucent silicone skin, casting an otherworldly glow under the surface whenever Victor's eyes darted with anxiety or longing. It is said that the effect was so lifelike that, on the last day of shooting, an assistant swore she saw the puppet's gaze follow her beyond the camera's viewfinder, as if pleading to be remembered beyond the frame. Meanwhile, Emily, the corpse bride herself, harbored her own secret. Her skeletal fingers, poised eternally in a beguiling gesture of grace, concealed a microspring mechanism that allowed them to twitch ever so slightly, giving her an illusion of restless energy. When Emily first emerged from her grave, the slight tremor in her digits was mistaken for an errant flick of a stray wire. Only after weeks of observation did the team realize the springs had been wound too tightly, and each level crossing of her finger joints produced a delicate chime that echoed faintly through corridors, as if she were playing a melancholy tune on invisible strings. Some nights, the sound of distant piano drifted through the corridors, though no musicians were on site. Rumor held that Danny Elfman himself would wander the halls, humming motifs from the score as he refined its haunting melodies. But others whispered of something else, a spectre of nonsense, perhaps, an echo of the countless hours laborers spent in candlelit shifts, their hushed conversations manifesting as spectral echoes. At least one intern vowed she felt a breeze brush past her while traversing the unlit back lots, only to find the heavy doors locked tight on either side, with no wind to speak of. Among the most peculiar oddities was the fate of Mr. Bonejangles, the skeletal troubadour whose adagio on the fence became an emblem of love's bittersweet refrain. His bones were carved from a single block of resin, left to cure under special ultraviolet lamps that simulated decades of weathering. Yet, inexplicably, the lamp's exaggerated glare caused microscopic fractures to bloom across the resin surface, producing a spiderweb of hairline cracks that glimmered when backlit. The effect was mesmerizing. Bonejangles appeared to weep through his hollow sockets, but keeping up the illusion demanded constant repairs, with animators delicately sealing each fissure before the day's shoot. On set, the mood was far from solemn. Christopher Lee, lending his resounding baritone to the role of Lord Burkiss Bittern, insisted on code names for each prop to preserve secrecy. Burkiss's stiff upper lip decorum became the inspiration for Operation Plum Pudding, the mission to secure Burton's most treasured hat, a collector's item rumored to be cursed. Lee would dispatch assistants in the dead of night to guard the hat case, dressed in black waistcoats and waving ledger books as if on an audit. Some claimed that the hat did emanate a chill when held too long, but then again, it might simply have been Lee's voice reciting sonnets in the dark. The choice of palette itself felt strangely symbolic. Burton's preference for a palette dominated by teal and gray invited whispers that he drew inspiration from the old family crypt in East Sussex, where he once brushed cobwebs from ancestral gravestones as a boy. Some artists kept journals filled with notations. Emily's gown must inhale the moonlight, or Victor's coat should bleed subtly into fog. One concept artist even noted that the chairs in the marshland sequence were tinted a peculiar shade called Morning Dove, so evocative of sorrow that a single test render reduced several crew members to tears. It wasn't just lighting and paint that produced marvels. The animators discovered an unexpected phenomenon when they began capturing facial movements. As they rehearsed Victor's final confession, the puppet's jaw mechanism repeatedly jammed, creating a staccato rhythm that made the words sound as though spoken underwater. Rather than discard the takes, Burton had them integrated into the scene, the rhythmic glitch lending an aquatic resonance to Victor's vow. To this day, eagle-eyed fans swear they can hear the ghostly cadence beneath the surface of his apology, an audible reminder that every frame bore the imprint of imperfection. Despite the ceaseless attention to detail, the production nearly ground to a halt over a misplaced eyebrow. It was tiny, a slender, curved filament of vinyl, yet it gave Victor an expression of startled wonder that became indispensable. One morning, a furious search ensued when the eyebrow vanished, presumed stolen by rival studios or spirited away by a disgruntled crew member. The search spanned hours until a battered security camera revealed the culprit, a mischievous raccoon that had slipped through a gap in the loading bay door and made off with the indispensable feature. After a tense standoff and a floodlight scare, the raccoon returned the eyebrow, dropping it at the feet of the art director before scuttling away into the night. Despite the ceaseless attention to detail, the production nearly ground to a halt over a misplaced eyebrow. It was tiny, a slender, curved filament of vinyl, yet it gave Victor an expression of startled wonder that became indispensable. One morning, a furious search ensued when the eyebrow vanished, presumed stolen by rival studios or spirited away by a disgruntled crew member. The search spanned hours until a battered security camera revealed the culprit, a mischievous raccoon that had slipped through a gap in the loading bay door and made off with the indispensable feature. After a tense standoff and a floodlight scare, the raccoon returned the eyebrow, dropping it at the feet of the art director before scuttling away into the night. Of all the puppets, none bore the scars of misadventure more than the spiders that wove their silky webs across the crypt. Tasked with crawling down Emily's cascading veil, the 8 diminutive puppets were outfitted with microscopic threads made from human hair. During one shoot, a stray breeze from an unguarded ventilation shaft sent the threads adrift in the air, tangling them into an intricate web across half the set. The ensuing chaos lasted well into the next day, as animators spent hours disentangling each strand by hand, lamenting the lost continuity of Death's delicate tapestry. Perhaps the most curious detail was neither mechanical nor spectral, but botanical. Burton insisted on dressing Emily's grave in living plants, ivy, ferns, and night-blooming flowers, so that each frame would host a genuine whisper of life. The tiny roots, however, felt at home in the damp clay and began to entwine with the gravel, sprouting shoots that appended miniature tombstones. The production's horticultural consultant proposed daily pruning routines, wielding tweezers like a surgeon to snip away rebellious greenery. Yet sometimes, on a particularly humid morning, a stray fern frond would persist, tipping over a gravestone just as the cameras rolled, creating an impromptu tribute to the persistence of nature even in death. At twilight, when the moonlight washed silver across the soundstage, the animators believed they saw shadows moving behind the curtains. It was easy to attribute the shuddering silhouettes to the cables rigged for macro photography or the sway of props in unseen currents. But for one night, the figure of a tall gentleman in a top hat seemed to drift past the key light, a stranger, elegant and silent. The next morning, the crew discovered an old charcoal drawing pinned to the call sheet, a stylized portrait of Burton himself, gazing solemnly from behind a billboard-sized easel. Inscribed on the margin were the words, "Thank you for bringing her home," penned in a flourish that matched Burton's own signature. No one knew who left it there, but many agreed it carried the weight of a benediction. As the weeks gave way to months, the pace never slackened. Animators worked in teams named for family crypts, Mausoleum 5, Bone Vault Brigade, competing to see which squad could finish their 50-frame sequences without needing retakes. At day's end, exhausted hands would reach for chipped coffee mugs stamped with the film's skeletal emblem, sharing stories of mechanical mischief and accidental triumphs. They recalled the day an entire batch of backup puppets arrived swapped with Halloween decorations from a nearby party shop, forcing them to animate a skeletal bride wearing glow-in-the-dark plastic flowers until the error was caught. Even the soundtrack bore its share of spectral oddities. When composer Elfman recorded Victoria's theme, the microphone malfunctioned, adding an eerie echo that seemed to drift off into infinity. Initially dismissed as technical noise, the effect was later harnessed to accentuate the moment when Victor first glimpses Emily in her burial shroud. Rather than erase the echo, Elfman wove it into the orchestration, a lingering note that resonated like a distant heartbeat. Fans rhapsodized that on select high-fidelity systems, that echo extends beyond the film's end credits, a ghostly refrain that haunts the silence long after the last chord strikes. In the heart of all such marvels lay the steadfast dedication of a team unwilling to accept the ordinary. When the final frames were wrapped and the studio lights faded to black, the set was left strewn with half-disassembled puppets and scuffed tools, remnants of magic made manifest. Yet it was in that disarray that the true spirit of Corpse Bride endured, a testament to the belief that even the strangest oddities, the tiniest accidents, and the most stubborn shadows could coalesce into something unforgettable. Thus, in each trembling gesture of Victor's porcelain hand, in Emily's mournful smile etched upon delicate plastic, one hears not only the echo of Burton's vision, but the whispered legacy of every soul who coaxed life from silence, turning celluloid dreams into a dance between life and death. A hush descended over the gathering twilight as the silhouettes of the guests began to assemble in the ethereal ballroom of Burton's imagination, each figure a vessel for deeper meaning, each gesture freighted with unspoken longing. From the moment Victor's trembling footsteps first echoed across the creaking floorboards, the film invited us to peer beyond the veil of whimsy and into the tangled skein of mortality and devotion that lay beneath. The wedding rehearsal in the garden, with its opulent display of silk and ribbon, felt less a celebration of union than a gilded cage, an ornate prison for a shy soul too gentle to refuse the demands of social expectation. Critics have long noted that this sequence, while presented with a veneer of buoyant comedy, underscores a pervasive anxiety about the rites that bind us and the stifling weight of tradition that can turn even the sweetest petals of hope bitter with fear. Victor's collapse at the altar, the soil of the graveyard tumbling over his powdered shoes, marked the film's first true pivot into the realm of the uncanny. In that moment, the narrative shed its comedic trappings and revealed a darker current, one that speaks to the fragility of intention when confronted with forces beyond our control. The arrival of Emily, her skeletal hand extended in delicate invitation, became for many observers a commentary on the redemptive power of love that transcends the boundaries of life and death. Yet as poignant as their burgeoning bond appeared, it also invited questions about agency and consent. Victor had not sought her, yet found himself inexorably drawn into her world. Critics argue that this inversion of the expected courtship ritual, where the living suitor becomes the pursued, functions as a subversive reflection on the ways in which desire can entangle the unwary, binding them to consequences they scarcely understand. As Emily's story unfurled through flashbacks of yearning and betrayal, the film achieved a rare alchemy. It rendered the past as vivid as the present, collapsing time so that memory bled into the moment. Viewers have praised Burton's deft use of silhouette and shadow to evoke emotional resonance, transforming Emily's former life into a ghostly opera of regret and resilience. The sequence in which she attempts to escape her fate, trailing torn ribbons through an ornate manor, resonates on a thematic level as a meditation on the constraints women have historically faced, trapped by contract and expectation. In critical circles, as Emily's story unfurled through flashbacks of yearning and betrayal, the film achieved a rare alchemy. It rendered the past as vivid as the present, collapsing time so that memory bled into the moment. Viewers have praised Burton's deft use of silhouette and shadow to evoke emotional resonance, transforming Emily's former life into a ghostly opera of regret and resilience. The sequence in which she attempts to escape her fate, trailing torn ribbons through an ornate manor, resonates on a thematic level as a meditation on the constraints women have historically faced, trapped by contract and expectation. In critical circles, Emily's tragic arc has been heralded as an emblem of empowerment through reclamation. By embracing her own death, she achieves a freedom denied to her in life, and extends that liberation to Victor through her sacrifice. As the two worlds collided in the moonlit marshes, the film's cinematography emerged as a character in its own right, weaving together frames of mist and rippling reflections that mirrored the protagonist's internal turmoil. The water, dark and unyielding, served as both barrier and conduit, a motif that critics interpret as the membrane between consciousness and oblivion. When Victor plucks Emily's hand from the murk and offers his promise, the gesture becomes a covenant not merely of love but of transition, a passage from innocence to experience, from fear to acceptance. Some scholars have noted that the marsh scene echoes 19th-century Gothic literature, calling to mind the liminal spaces where living and dead converge, yet Burton imbues it with a tenderness that tempers the dread, suggesting that the encounter between worlds need not be apocalyptic, but can offer the balm of understanding. Perhaps the film's most debated moment arrives in its finale, when Victor awakens once again at the graveside, clutching the wedding ring in numb disbelief. The revelation that he has been freed from Emily's binding vow by the restoration of her own chance at peace struck many as both heartbreaking and hopeful. Critics diverge on the emotional currency of this resolution. Some see in Emily's final smile a triumphant act of self-actualization, a reclaiming of narrative agency. Others mourn the poignant truth that love, no matter how profound, cannot undo the boundaries that separate life from death. Yet across the spectrum of analysis, there is agreement that the film's conclusion transcends the binary of happy or tragic, offering instead an elegiac reflection on the impermanence of all bonds, and the beauty found in letting go. Interwoven through these central events is Danny Elfman's score, which critics have lauded as the beating heart of the film's emotional architecture. From the lilting melodies that accompany Victor's tentative steps through the underworld to the swelling chorales that underscore Emily's liberation, the music frames each narrative beat with a poignant clarity. Academic essays have dissected the leitmotifs that emerge in Emily's theme, noting how the minor key strains shift to major key only at the moment of her release, signaling an emotional catharsis that words alone cannot convey. It is in the silences between notes, however, that the score finds its true power, those pregnant pauses where the audience holds its breath, suspended between sorrow and elation, mirroring the film's own oscillation between worlds. Beyond the narrative and sonic landscape, the film's production history itself became a point of critical fascination. The decision to shoot in stop motion, eschewing the slick sheen of digital animation, lent the film an artisanal, tactile quality that reviewers hailed as a return to cinema's hands-on roots. In essays published at the time of release, commentators compared Burton's commitment to frame-by-frame puppetry to the craftsmanship of early filmmakers, celebrating the imperfections, an errant shadow here, a brief flicker of wire movement there, that imbued the film with soul. This embrace of imperfection challenged prevailing industry trends, suggesting that authenticity and emotional depth often arise from the laborious beauty of manual creation, rather than the flawless veneer of computer-generated imagery. From a thematic standpoint, Corpse Bride engages with motifs of societal expectation, the nature of promises, and the transformative power of empathy. Victor's initial seduction by the trappings of status, represented by his lofty bride-to-be and her genteel surroundings, stands in stark contrast to his ultimate devotion to Emily, who asks nothing of him but honesty and compassion. Critical essays have pointed out that this juxtaposition serves as a broader critique of materialism and performative ritual, suggesting that genuine connection thrives in spaces unencumbered by pretense. Emily's forgiveness of Victor's unwitting betrayal further deepens this inquiry, illustrating that love's truest acts may be those that grant freedom rather than demand possession. The film's reception among audiences mirrored these layered interpretations. Box office figures showed a steady climb as word spread of the movie's haunting beauty, and social media chatter, then in its nascent stages, buzzed with fan theories about the film's deeper meanings. Some online forums debated whether Emily's return to the grave signaled a form of cosmic justice, while others posited that Victor's waking world had been irrevocably altered by his encounter with death. The film's resonance endured beyond its theatrical run. Annual screenings around Halloween became a tradition among cinephiles, who cited the film's capacity to evoke both melancholy and joy as a rare alchemy in modern animation. In the years since its premiere, critical scholarship has continued to mine its depths. Feminist readings emphasize Emily's journey from objectified bride, promised in marriage without voice or choice, to autonomous spirit, whose final act of selflessness enshrines her as the story's true heroine. Psychoanalytic critics explore Victor's passage through the underworld as a metaphor for the individuation process, the soul's reckoning with loss as a precursor to mature emotional identity. Meanwhile, cultural historians trace the film's Victorian aesthetic to a broader revival of 19th-century sensibilities in early 21st-century art, noting how the movie's sepia-tone palette and Gothic flourishes tapped into a zeitgeist fascinated by the interplay of nostalgia and innovation. Yet perhaps the most enduring critical perspective is the one that returns most insistently to the film's capacity to move the heart. In academic journals and fanblogs alike, writers recount the involuntary catch in the throat they experience as Emily releases Victor's finger by the glowing lantern, or as Victor's muted gasp echoes across the silent graveyard. These visceral reactions, critics argue, are the true measure of the film's success, not in the cleverness of its twists or the elegance of its design, but in its power to bridge the chasm between pixels and pulse, to remind us that stories of ghosts and goblins can, at their best, illuminate the truths of our own mortality and yearning. The cinematic events that structure Corpse Bride achieve their full potency not as isolated set pieces but as interlocking moments in a tapestry of shadow and light. Each scene builds upon the last, weaving dread and delight into an emotional sinew that binds audience to narrative. The awkward formality of the rehearsal dinner gives way to the eerie embrace of the underworld. The comical fracas of the cemetery transforms into the solemn majesty of Emily's requiem. Critics applaud this seamless flow, noting that the film's pacing mirrors the rhythms of grief itself, alternating between convulsive pangs and gentle sighs, until the final release brings an acceptance as profound as it is bittersweet. When the credits roll and the last strains of Elfman's score fade into silence, the viewer is left not with the neat closure of a conventional fairy tale, but with a lingering sense of mystery, and perhaps a quiet invitation to ponder the promises we make, the sacrifices we ask of love, and the courage required to embrace both life and death as parts of a singular, unfolding journey. In that embrace, critical perspectives find their truest expression, a testament to cinema's power to hold a mirror to our deepest fears and desires, and to tell us, through puppets and shadow play, that even in the strangest of stories, we may find the threads that bind us all. A hush fell over the cavernous soundstage in the pre-dawn hours, the only illumination the soft glow of worklights draped across row upon row of miniature gravestones. As the crew filed in, rubbing sleep from their eyes, clutching steaming mugs of coffee, they knew they were stepping into a world both wondrous and exacting. This was the domain of stop-motion animation, where every breath, every heartbeat, every flutter of a pendulous lantern had to be coaxed frame by arduous frame. Yet there was magic in that solitude, a camaraderie born of shared obsession, and from those first whispered greetings rippled a sense of purpose that would carry them through months of painstaking labor. Long before the cameras rolled, the production designers had transformed raw materials, blocks of foam, sheets of resin, coils of wire, into the skeletal parliament of characters that would inhabit Tim Burton's melancholic vision. The workshop buzzed with the whir of carving tools and the hiss of pneumatic drills as artisans sculpted Victor's porcelain features and Emily's delicate bone-white skull. Each puppet was engineered to withstand the rigors of relentless manipulation, joints reinforced with stainless steel pins, eyelids actuated by fine-tuned levers, and internal cavities reserved for LED modules that could glow like embers in the dim recesses of the underworld. Watching these puppets take shape was like witnessing an anatomical miracle, the promise of life distilled into plastic and paint. Simultaneously, the art department labored over the film's hallmark sets, towering Gothic structures that rose from hand-textured polystyrene, fog-shrouded forests built from armatures wrapped in chicken wire and plaster. One room glowed with racks of meticulously weathered tombstones, each carved with its own epitaph, while another brimmed with jars of tinted resins, the palette for fog and moss, grime and gloom. It was here, amid the scent of oil paints and the tang of fresh concrete, that the production folk first glimpsed the film's true scale, a microcosm of Burton's world, every element weighted with symbolic intent, every surface yearning to tell a story of love and loss. On set, the atmosphere was both disciplined and playful. Days began at dawn with script calls, But these were no perfunctory recitations. Rather, they were communal rituals in which the director, animators, and department heads reconvened around storyboards thumbtacked to a corkboard the size of a barn door. Burton himself would lounge on a chaise draped in velvet, poring over each sketch, debating the precise arc of a character's spine or the curvature of a skeletal finger. He listened intently to his crew, valuing their suggestions, yet when inspiration struck, he could pivot the sequence on a dime, ordering that Emily's veil billow more like seaweed, or that Victor's coat flap with a sharper angle to accentuate his nervous energy. The animators, those unsung heroes, spent hours hunched under macro lenses, coaxing the slightest nuance into life. They prized precision above all. A fingertip shift of a millimeter, a twitch in the chin made all the difference in emotional clarity. One animator later recalled the exquisite agony of a single shot in which Victor reaches to grasp Emily's hand for the first time. They had rehearsed that movement for days, tallying frames, adjusting torque on the wrist, until Burton declared it perfect. But at the moment of capture, a rogue speck of dust landed on the puppet's eyelid, refracting light in a way that read on camera as a tear. Instead of reshooting, Burton asked the crew to leave it, an unintentional embellishment that now occupies one of the film's most poignant moments. Soundstage anecdotes multiplied as the weeks passed. One night, the lighting crew staged an impromptu contest to see who could fashion the most convincing moonlight using the fewest barn doors and predictors. Out of this challenge emerged the now iconic pale aquamarine glow that bathes the underworld, a hue achieved by layering quarter-white gels over cyan filters in combination with a careful fog density. The experiment nearly set off the fire sprinklers when a haze machine overheated, but that narrow escape only deepened everyone's resolve to cling to the film's aesthetic, even when it flirted with disaster. Meanwhile, the costume department found itself in a botanical quandary. Emily's tattered gown, woven from silk shavings and antique lace, needed to hold its grandeur while allowing full articulation for the slightest shift of her shoulders. Cobbling together samples from thrift store gowns and repurposed costume scraps, they stitched an ethereal tapestry that fluttered like smoke. Yet when the first test shoot revealed the fabric too light, billowing into unnatural swirls, the seamstresses resorted to a clandestine dose of powdered marble dust to gain weight. The result was a gossamer-heavy texture that responded to every breath of studio air as though it were alive. Beyond the technical triumphs, the human stories lent the production its heartbeat. The voice actors, Helena Bonham Carter, Johnny Depp, and Michael Gough, found themselves unexpectedly immersed in the miniature world. Burton, ever the host, transformed the recording studio into a parlor of curiosities, draping it with cobwebs and candelabras so the actors could inhabit the film's gothic ambience. Beyond the technical triumphs, the human stories lent the production its heartbeat. The voice actors, Helena Bonham Carter, Johnny Depp, and Michael Gough, found themselves unexpectedly immersed in the miniature world. Burton, ever the host, transformed the recording studio into a parlor of curiosities, draping it with cobwebs and candelabras so the actors could inhabit the film's gothic ambience. Bonham Carter admitted later that watching her own vocal performances while surrounded by shadowy props filled her with spine-tingling delight, lending authenticity to Emily's mournful yet hopeful timbre. One evening, following an especially raucous recording session of Johnston's raucous Caterpillar song, the crew decamped to a nearby tavern where Burton regaled them with tales of his childhood explorations in English graveyards. His voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper as he described the ivy-clad crypts and the moss-covered angels, and the listeners leaned forward, spellbound. It was on that night that the production designer sketched the final glyphs on the mausoleum gates, a flourish so evocative that it would never appear in simpler pencil studies. When the production faced its inevitable crises, broken armatures, snapped pulley lines, or the disappearance of critical props, the team learned to improvise like seasoned stage magicians. A lost skeletal bird prop was replaced with a papier-mâché surrogate nailed with bent pins. A broken track dolly gave birth to Operation Rolling Coffin, in which props wranglers repurposed a wheeled makeup cart to achieve a fluid pan across the graveyard floor. These on-the-fly fixes became legend, retold around midnight meals and memorialized on the set's blackboard under the heading Burton's Bag of Tricks. In the lighting pit, gaffers discovered that the artful interplay of shadows could be manipulated by the barest thread of nylon, draped just so in front of a key light. The ghost scrim they devised, barely perceptible but infinitely controllable, allowed them to hint at phantoms in the background or to suggest shifting clouds overhead. One technician later confessed that he would adjust that scrim from outside shooting hours, drawn back night after night to observe how its dance against the set breathed a subtle life into the eerie tableaus. Behind closed doors, the schedule read like the pages of a sailor's log: early calls, late shoots, weekend overtime, and the recurring mantra that every extra second on set translated into seconds of story on screen. Yet the camaraderie never wavered. When animators hit the 70-hour mark, producers dispatched gourmet food trucks, Philly cheesesteaks, authentic ramen, artisanal tacos, to replenish their flagging energies. In return, crew members staged puppet parades at the end of each week, arranging their characters in makeshift processions across the floor and cheering as if their tiny tributes would someday march into theaters worldwide. The film's music sessions added another layer of enchantment. Danny Elfman, hovering over the piano in the scoring stage, would pause mid-melody to mimic the timbre of a puppet's creak or the rustle of Emily's dress, eliciting laughter from the orchestra. Cellists swore they could hear the doll's bones clicking in harmony with their staccato lines. And when the chorus arrived to lend its voice to the somber requiem, the singers found themselves swaddled in blankets of fog, an atmospheric touch devised to help them imagine the underworld's damp chill and bring authenticity to every note. Among the production's more idiosyncratic tales was the saga of the graveyard gnome. During location scouting, a crew member spotted a weathered garden gnome tucked behind a tangle of blackberry vines. Thinking it the perfect emblem of whimsy, the prop department painstakingly replicated it at 1/10 scale, polishing its chipped paint and reattaching its missing shovel with dental wire. When the miniature gnome appeared in the final cut, peeking from behind a tombstone, it prompted squeals of delight from the crew. Audiences never noticed it, but within the studio, it became a symbol of the film's attention to minutiae. As the months wore on and principal photography cycled into post, the editing bay became the new battleground. Burton would sit for hours with the assistant editor, scrutinizing every cut, trimming frames off a puppet's blink, extending a dissolve to heighten suspense. Meanwhile, the post-production team wrestled with integrating the stop-motion plates with digital enhancements. The shimmer of spirit embers floating through the air, the subtle glow around Emily's fingertips, the deformation of reality as Victor's world tilted between life and death. These effects were carefully layered, each stroke of digital paint intended not to overpower the handmade charm, but to complement it, a silent handshake between craft and code. Color grading pushed the film's palette into its unforgettable teal and cranberry extremes, the land of the living cast in warm, muted browns and sepias, the realm of the dead bathed in cool, velvety shadows. The grading suite buzzed with debates over hue and saturation, artists arguing for more midnight blue depth in the night sky or a richer vermilion in Emily's cheeks. Their final compromise resulted in the iconic contrast that visually underscores the emotional dichotomy at the film's heart. All the while, marketing artifacts sprouted from the creative efforts. Concept art, hand-inked by Burton's longtime collaborators, adorned posters that hinted at mystery rather than spoon-feeding the plot. The trailers showcased glimpses of Victor's quivering silhouette and Emily's skeletal profile, cut to Elfman's swooping refrain. A viral campaign sent limited-edition wedding invitations to influencers, printed on parchment and sealed with blood-red wax bearing the film's crest. Fans opened them to find cryptic verses inviting them to a union beyond life and love, a tease as playful as it was eerie. When release day finally dawned, theaters around the world flickered their lights in deference to Burton's labor of love. Audience reactions spanned giggles at the macabre humor, gasps at the lurking shadows, and, above all, admiration for the painstaking artistry. Crew members crowded into seats alongside strangers, marveling at how their nightly grind had coalesced into a seamless cinematic tapestry. More than one animator noted that the film's sense of tactile authenticity, its tangible sets and physical puppets, resonated deeply in an age dominated by digital effects, a testament to the enduring power of human touch. In quiet moments that followed the premiere, Burton wandered back to the now-vacant soundstage, its set stripped down to naked girders and bare concrete. He ran a gloved hand along the cold surface of a dismantled puppet arm, recalling the laughter and tension, the challenges met and the small triumphs won. The marks of Scotch tape and grease paint bore witness to the countless frames captured there. And as he stood amid the ghosts of his creation, he would surely have felt a surge of gratitude for every artist, every technician, every voice actor who dared to breathe life into the improbable romance of a corpse bride and her gentleman suitor. Thus, the film's legacy emerged not only in its haunting visuals and lilting score, but in the stories that grew around its making, an anthology of devotion that binds director, crew, and audience in a shared belief that art can arise from the most unlikely of unions, the union of meticulous craft and boundless imagination. Even now, years later, those who turn the pages of the production notebooks or revisit the faded Polaroids of the set feel that same undercurrent of wonder. For in the delicate mechanical heartbeats of Victor and Emily, in the whispered footfalls across miniature cobblestones, the true magic of Corpse Bride endures, the alchemy of human hands turning fragments of foam and resin into a tale that dances between the worlds of the living and the dead, reminding us that sometimes the most enchanting stories begin with the strangest of facts and the gentlest of touches. A hush settles over the opening moments, as if the world itself draws breath before revealing its secrets. The camera drifts above the cobbled lanes of Everglot, its vantage point high and distant, like a secret watcher glimpsing human folly from beyond. Slate-gray rooftops slope in uneven angles, their shingles matte and worn, each tile a relic of some long-forgotten storm. From this godlike perspective, the town feels at once quaint and claustrophobic. The buildings huddle together, their chimneys spitting thin plumes of smoke that curl into an orange dusk. In the distance, the silhouette of the church looms, its spire knifing the sky, as though ready to pierce the heavens. Here, the setting is not merely a backdrop but a silent storyteller, whispering of rigid social mores and the weight of expectation that presses upon every narrow alley and shuttered window. As the scene descends to street level, the camera adopts a tighter frame, tracking Victor's hurried descent through families clad in muted browns and grays. The lens breathes with him, wobbles ever so slightly to mimic his trembling nerves, lending the chaos of the wedding rehearsal an unpredictable rhythm. Lanterns flicker at regular intervals along the procession route, casting pools of golden light against the dusky world, yet never quite dispelling the encroaching shadows. Those shadows, long, sharp-edged, and sinuous, stretch across the ground like restless spirits, hinting that beneath the veneer of celebration lies an undercurrent of unease. Victor's footsteps echo, unnaturally amplified, as if the cobblestones themselves whisper warnings. Every camera tilt and pan is deliberate here, guiding our emotions through the labyrinthine streets and reminding us that, in this world, appearances are as brittle as the porcelain masks we wear. Night deepens, and the world of the living recedes into silhouette. The camera's gaze shifts to the cemetery, a realm of pale marble and rusted iron gates, where gravestones stand like hushed sentinels. Here, depth of field plays its part. The foreground blossoms into sharp relief, each etching on a tombstone rendered in stark clarity, while the background dissolves into tendrils of mist. Through this visual alchemy, the mundane transforms into the mystical. A single crow takes flight, its wings beating with eerie rhythm, and a gust of wind rattles chains draped across a tomb. The sound design amplifies every clink, every rustle, as though the cemetery is alive with hidden machinery. When Victor's despair drives him to repeat his vow, the camera circles him in a slow, spiraling arc, pulling us into his vortex of anxiety, until the moment he slips the ring onto Emily's skeletal finger feels both inevitable and otherworldly. In the Underworld, the palette shifts with breathtaking subtlety. The fog here is no mere effect, it billows with purpose, painted in layered hues of teal and aquamarine that bleed into the gloom. Light filters through unseen fissures in the earth, illuminating patches of rotten moonlight that dance upon broken stones. The animators play with chiaroscuro as though sculpting with darkness itself. Inky shadows swallow entire corridors, only to relieve their grip at the moment Emily emerges, framed by a halo of pale light. Her gown seems to capture and refract that glow, as though she is woven from luminescent mist. These visual choices convey more than a sense of place. They embody the emotional polarity at the heart of the story, the tension between fear and curiosity, dread and wonder. Every frame becomes a painting in motion, each shift in lighting a brushstroke that heightens our sense of stepping into an unseen realm. The camera often lingers on architectural details, allowing the viewer to absorb the faded grandeur of crumbling mausoleums. Gargoyles perch atop arches, their stone eyes glinting in the half-light, while wrought iron fences twist and coil like skeletal vines. The filmmakers breathe life into these inanimate forms through subtle motion. A shuddering spider scuttles across a pillar, its legs glistening with dew. A loose shard of glass quivers in the breeze, reflecting a fleeting spark of hope. Such moments, though visually brief, punctuate the rhythm of the narrative, reminding us that within this realm of death, remnants of life persist. The camera's patience in lingering on these spaces cultivates a sense of intimacy, as though the viewer has been granted unfettered access to a secret world beyond the veil. At pivotal emotional beats, the cinematography becomes more visceral. When Victor first beholds Emily's outstretched hand, the perspective shifts to a low-angle shot, emphasizing her spectral majesty. The lens flares softly at the edges, lending her form a dreamlike quality, while a gentle rack focus draws our attention to the fine detailing of her garments. Lace frayed at the edges, shimmering dust clinging to every fold. The slow dolly in and the slight Dutch tilt evoke a sense of vertigo, mirroring Victor's inner tumult as he grapples with the impossible. Every visual choice here is calibrated to deepen the emotional resonance, plunging us into the uncharted waters of enchantment and dread. Return to the world of the living, and the cinematography adopts a different cadence, steadier, more measured. Soft amber light suffuses domestic interiors. Beams of sunlight pierce through drapes, casting geometric patterns on worn floorboards. The camera floats through rooms as if guided by memory, pausing at objects that whisper of character. A faded portrait of Victor's ancestors, a cracked teacup resting on a saucer, the stiff lace of Victoria's wedding dress waiting in abeyance. These vignettes speak volumes without uttering a word, each composition a testament to the lives lived within these walls. The ambient hum of daily rituals, the clink of china, the rustle of fabric, underscores how tethered the living are to routine, in stark contrast to the unbound realm below. Transitions between these worlds are seamless yet jarring. A match cut from the dank marsh to a sunlit hedge garden collapses hours and realities in a heartbeat. In one breath we inhale decay, and in the next, we bask in the ordered beauty of clipped hedges and pastel blossoms. The juxtaposition illuminates the film's central dialectic, life's facade of order versus death's liberation from constraint. Cinematographer Pete Kozaczek and Burton craft these shifts with the precision of a conjurer, using crossfades and whip pans to blur boundaries, insisting that the worlds are. Transitions between these worlds are seamless yet jarring. A match cut from the dank marsh to a sunlit hedge garden collapses hours and realities in a heartbeat. In one breath we inhale decay, and in the next, we bask in the ordered beauty of clipped hedges and pastel blossoms. The juxtaposition illuminates the film's central dialectic, life's facade of order versus death's liberation from constraint. Cinematographer Pete Kozaczek and Burton craft these shifts with the precision of a conjurer, using crossfades and whip pans to blur boundaries, insisting that the worlds are not fixed but fluid, interchangeable with each heartbeat. Close-ups serve as emotional anchors. When Emily confesses her sorrow, her hollow eyes dominate the frame, the camera so close that her cheekbones seem to brush the lens. A delicate depth of field blurs the distance between her and the viewer, compelling us to witness her pain as our own. The cinematography refuses to allow passive spectatorship. Instead, it demands empathy. Tiny lights embedded in Emily's eye sockets catch the camera's embrace, transforming empty hollows into portals of longing. We feel compelled to lean in, as though, to borrow Burton's own metaphor, we might discover a spark of warmth in dead things. Spatial dynamics also inform the narrative's emotional arc. In the early ballroom scenes, wide-angle lenses exaggerate the cavernous scale of the grand hall, dwarfing Victor amid towering pillars and sweeping balconies. The verticality of the space reinforces his smallness, his unease under the weight of expectation. By contrast, scenes in the underworld often employ medium lenses, tightening the claustrophobic feel of cramped corridors and vaults. Here, the camera moves laterally, tracking alongside Emily as she leads Victor through her domain, the walls close enough to murmur secrets in the darkness. These fluctuations in framing mirror Victor's journey from the open, cold expanse of social ceremony to the intimate, if eerie, embrace of the dead. The filmmaker's command of lensing extends to the film's most jubilant moments as well. During Bonejangle's fence serenade, the camera pirouettes around the skeletal troubadour, a wide circular shot that mimics the waltzing energy of his melody. The mise-en-scene swells with life. Ghostly motes of dust drift like dancers in a moonbeam, broken piano keys mark each beat, and for a fleeting instant, the underworld feels vibrant and alive. The cinematography here is joyous yet tinged with melancholy, reminding us that even in death, there can be celebration, and that such fleeting echoes of joy render the inevitable return to silence all the more poignant. Color grading is as vital a player as lens or light. The living world's palette is palette-cleansed of saturation, leaving behind earth tones and whispers of pastels that seem drained of vitality. In contrast, the underworld boasts bold strokes, turquoise skies, magenta-tinged fog, and crimson lantern light that pools like spilled wine across the stone. These choices create a visual shorthand for the film's thematic currents, the restraint of life versus the unleashing of emotion in death's domain. A single shot can contain both palettes, bisected by a horizon line that tears the frame in two, a silent testimony to the film's central tension. Patterns of movement within these frames carry meaning, too. Birds flutter in the top corners of a living world shot, their restless wings a metaphor for Victor's suppressed desires. In the underworld, swarms of insects flit in and out of focus, a dance of decay that becomes unexpectedly beautiful. Camera moves echo these motifs. A hesitant push forward in a living scene contrasts with a confident pullback in the underworld, as though the dead claim the camera's embrace more readily than the living. This reversal in kinetic energy reminds us that the film's heart beats strongest where life has already ceased. Finally, the film's closing tableau is a masterclass in visual poetry. Victor's awakening in the graveyard is captured in a single steady shot. The camera holds its position as the sun breaks through rolling clouds, illuminating the dew on gravestones like diamonds. The mist recedes, the palette warms imperceptibly, and we sense that worlds have realigned. Emily's departure, framed as a silhouette against the rising sun, echoes her introduction but imbued with new meaning. Here, cinematography and setting converge to offer a final benediction, that love might transcend the boundaries of existence, leaving traces upon sky and stone alike. In the end, Corpse Bride settings and cinematic elements are more than visual spectacle. They are the language through which the film speaks its deepest truths. Every shot, every lens choice, every palette shift is an invitation to immerse oneself in a world where love and mortality entwine in eternal waltz. As the credits roll, the images linger in our minds. A church spire carving the dusk, a lantern's glow reflected in a skeletal tear, the horizon line dividing two visions of reality. Through these cinematic gestures, we understand that in Burton's realm, setting is soul, and every frame is a love letter to the beauty that resides in both life and death. Dawn's first tendrils of light crept through the high windows of the soundstage long before the crew arrived, casting pale gold ribbons across stacks of crates and half-finished puppets. In that quiet half-hour, the space felt pregnant with possibility, as though the air itself were holding its breath in anticipation of another day of wonders. Soon, footsteps and whispered greetings would fill the vast hall, and the hush would be broken by the low hum of generators and the faint creak of wooden armatures being adjusted. Yet in those early moments, the soundstage existed suspended between worlds, neither fully alive nor entirely still, an in-between realm that mirrored the very heart of Corpse Bride's story. When the crew filtered in, rubbing their eyes and hefting their mugs of spiced coffee, they encountered their first informal ritual, a slow circuit of the workshop's prized puppets, each one propped upon a workbench and illuminated by individual desk lamps. Animators, riggers, and prop artisans alike would pause before these figures, Victor, Emily, Victoria, Bonejangles, and offer a quiet nod or word of encouragement. The puppets were more than mere objects. They were partners in an intricate dance across thousands of frames. One veteran animator swore that he could feel a flutter of expectancy in Emily's painted eyes, as though she were waking from a dream and eager to tell her tale. As cameras rolled later that morning, the atmosphere on set was charged with a blend of reverence and mischief. Between takes, the animators maintained a delicate balance of focus and levity. Chains rattled, fog machines hissed, and lights swung into place, yet laughter always found its way through the labyrinth of scaffolding. One morning, the boom operator, affectionately known as Spike, decided to surprise the team by piloting his microphone rig across the floor like an oversized puppet, eliciting squeals of delight when he aimed it toward a hapless gaffer snoring in his chair. The sound crew chased him in mock pursuit, and the chase culminated in a grand collision of cables and coffee cups, sending espresso splattering across a pile of storyboard sketches. Rather than scold them, Burton laughed so heartily that the entire crew joined. The sound crew chased him in mock pursuit, and the chase culminated in a grand collision of cables and coffee cups, sending espresso splattering across a pile of storyboard sketches. Rather than scold them, Burton laughed so heartily that the entire crew joined in, and the spilled coffee was later immortalized in an impromptu piece of concept art depicting a skeletal gaffer holding a dripping latte. The camaraderie between departments ran deep. One late afternoon, the props team invited the animators to a makeshift graveyard barbecue behind the stage, where they'd hauled out charcoal grills and flung open crates of sausages and skewers of marinated mushrooms. Lanterns hung from the rafters, flickering in the breeze like low-hung stars, and a mix of contraband vinyl records spun on a battered turntable. When the Caterpillar chorus tune from the Caterpillar's tent scene began to play, the crew erupted in dance, their shadows cavorting against the blank cold walls as if auditioning for a ghostly pageant. Burton himself arrived bearing a thermos of oolong tea, which he sipped thoughtfully before offering advice on how to enhance the squeak of a puppet's knee. The barbecue wasn't in any schedule or budget. It was a spontaneous celebration of the shared passion that bound everyone together. Despite the laughter, the production was not without its trials. The miniature suspension bridge over the marsh presented one of the most persistent headaches. Built from delicate balsa wood and fine steel cables, the bridge was designed to tremble under the slightest breeze, lending authenticity to the scene where Victor and Emily traverse from one realm to another. Yet every day, the wind from the cooling vents and the corridors beyond would conspire to send the entire structure into spasms of over-enthusiastic shaking. Animators grappled with the instability, their fingers brushing against shifting cables as they tried to coax the perfect balance between tension and calm. After a week of frustration, during which every shot threatened to dissolve into a blur of unintended motion, the gaffer rigged a series of sandbags hidden beneath the stage floor. The weight stabilized the bridge enough to capture the desired subtle sways, and the discreet fix went down in set lore as Operation Anchor. Plotting out the cables and counterweights became an impromptu physics lesson, one that left the tech crew marveling at how industrial concerns could become poetry in motion. In the recording booth, the voice actors immersed themselves in Burton's world with equal fervor. Helena Bonham Carter arrived first, her fingers tapping out a ghostly rhythm on the booth's glass as she tested Emily's soprano trill. Michael Goff, who voiced the kindly elder Gutknecht, greeted every line with a jovial chuckle, ad-libbing little fatherly admonitions that Burton often retained in the final mix. Johnny Depp, ever the chameleon, slipped into Victor's shy, stammering cadence so seamlessly that the crew sometimes forgot he was performing at all. One day, after a particularly spirited round of takes, Depp insisted on reading the lines backward, literally speaking every word in reverse, to see what nuances he could discover in the character's emotional undercurrents. Though the reversed audio was never used, the exercise yielded a fresh insight. The joy and awkward hope in Victor's greetings felt more poignant when approached as a puzzle, and that subtle tension found its way into his normal delivery. In the heart of the soundstage, the lighting team faced their own blend of artistry and engineering. To achieve the film's signature teal and amber contrast, they experimented with layers of colored gels, diffusers, and fog density until the haze in the underworld seemed to glow like spectral embers. Yet one night, as the gaffer paused to answer a call and accidentally left a haze machine running at full blast, the fog pumped into the hallway, setting off smoke alarms across adjacent studio blocks. Chaos ensued as fire crews descended only to find nothing amiss but the clever artistry of the crew. Smiling sheepishly when the alarms were silenced, the lighting crew vowed to better coordinate with the fire department next time, and the incident was joked about in subsequent nights as, "That time we nearly summoned the living to the dead." Beyond jokes and gentle hijinks, deeper bonds formed when the inevitable stress of deadlines pressed in. Midway through principal photography, a storm knocked out power to the studio for several hours. The puppets lay motionless in their rigs, the cameras dark, and the generators silent. For a moment, panic flickered. Would the humidity rise too high, warping the resin limbs? Would the temperature swing so drastically that the delicate springs in the puppets' fingers would lose tension? Yet the crews did not scatter. Instead, they lit every flashlight they could find, turned the soundstage into an impromptu candlelit salon, and passed around portable fans to keep the air moving. Someone produced a guitar, and soon they were singing old sea shanties and nursery rhymes, their voices echoing off the cavernous walls. That night, Victor's workshop became a sanctuary of solidarity, proof that the soul of a film is as much in shared moments of uncertainty as in the final polished frames. Among the countless technical challenges, perhaps the most delicate involved the microsprings in Emily's finger joints. Designed to simulate the faint tremor of life in her skeletal digits, the springs sometimes misfired, either locking tight or flinging her fingertips too far, turning a gentle tremor into an involuntary twirl. During the climactic hand-touch scene, the spring mechanism jammed entirely, freezing Emily's hand midair. With the cameras rolling and the crew holding their breaths, the lead animator gently unclipped the entire assembly, switched in a backup hand, and reattached it in under 6 minutes, a feat that drew spontaneous applause when the director called, "Cut." The remarkable dexterity on display solidified the rigging team's reputation as the film's unsung acrobats, and the jammed spring became a legendary near-disaster that bonded them in mutual respect. The communal spirit extended to the art department's miniature landscapes. One day, the model builder responsible for the Victorian garden had meticulously placed each blade of artificial grass by hand, only to arrive the next morning and find an errant footstep had flattened a 10-inch swath. Rather than rebuke the cleaner whose mop had inadvertently rolled over the display, the builder invited him to help rebuild the patch. Over the next hour, they worked side by side, sharing stories as they planted each blade, creating a spontaneous cross-departmental friendship. From that point forward, the cleaner was unofficially dubbed Honorary Landscape Technician, with full privileges at every stage of set dressing. Script supervisors played their own vital role in keeping the narrative thread unbroken. Armed with thick binders bristling with annotated script pages and continuity notes, they followed each shot with hawk-like precision. One afternoon, after a night shoot that stretched into the early dawn, the script supervisor noticed that Victor's coat lapel, which had been pinned in a particular way in the previous scene, now drooped at a slightly different angle. Instead of calling for a retake, something that would have cost precious hours. While the set was a hive of concentrated labor, moments of spontaneous artistry emerged. A boom mic operator happened to have a talent for sketching, and during quieter stretches, he would produce charcoal portraits of the puppets, leaving them pinned to the art department's board as playful odes to the characters. One evening, he drew a caricature of Bone Jangle's mid-song, complete with exaggerated bony strut and jaunty top hat. The prop masters, tickled by his vision, incorporated elements of the caricature into the puppet's next costume test, adding a slightly taller hat and a jaunty flourish to his bow tie. Thus, a casual sketch became part of the living design process, an example of how creativity flowed freely across roles. As the film moved into its final weeks, the editing suite became the nexus of tension and triumph. Burton spent long nights with the editor, poring over the stop-motion frames, deciding where to trim a few frames to heighten suspense or extend a dissolve to let an emotion breathe. The editor's room was lined with tea tins, unopened jigsaw puzzles, and a row of tiny figurines, some real, some incomplete puppets, resting on the windowsill as silent co-conspirators. During one marathon session, an intern accidentally deleted a critical chunk of footage, sending the team into a near panic. Yet backups were in place, and in a display of collective calm, the assistant immediately initiated the restore process while others brewed extra pots of coffee and shared anecdotes to keep spirits high. By dawn, the footage was recovered, the cuts restored, and the editor, though bleary-eyed, smiled, acknowledging that crises often revealed the team's steadfast resolve. In the days leading up to wrap, a bittersweet energy pervaded the soundstage. Animators, riggers, designers, and voice actors gathered for a final walkthrough of their miniature world. They traced the pathways of every scene, from the loping slopes of Everglot's rooftops to the vault-like corridors of the Underworld. Each crew member paused at their favored nook, the spot where Victoria's wedding dress swayed, the patch of moss at Emily's grave, the broken gate that creaked in perfect time to a mournful wind. Burton invited everyone to leave a small token behind, a note of encouragement, a sketch, or a simple signature. Those tokens now rest quietly among the set pieces, memorials to the hands that shaped them. On the ultimate day of shooting, cameras captured Victor's final awakening in the graveyard, Emily's silhouette dissolving into dawn, and the last echo of Elfman's score fading through the speakers. As the assistant called, "That's a wrap," a hush fell across the stage. First one person clapped, then another, until applause bloomed like a benediction. Some wept outright. Others hugged friends they had barely known 6 months prior but who had become confidants in adversity. They lingered among the remnants of their creation, fingers brushing against the felted moss, the ivory sheen of a puppet skull, the first footfalls of a legend on cobblestone. When the lights finally dimmed and the empty soundstage returned to its pre-dawn quiet, the echoes of laughter, chaos, and triumph still lingered in the corners. In the gentle stillness, one could almost sense the residue of every solved problem, every triumphant take, every late-night pot of tea brewed in the corner. The space, now bare and silent, bore the memory of a remarkable journey, a tapestry woven from perspiration, ingenuity, and pure-hearted devotion. And in that lingering silence, the true heartbeat of Corpse Bride remained, a testament not only to the magic conjured on screen but to the extraordinary community that made it possible, bound together by the conviction that even in the face of impossible challenges, a shared dream could blossom into something unforgettable. A hush falls over the canvas of Everglot as twilight drapes its velvet cloak across shuttered windows and soot-gray rooftops. In this liminal hour, the town seems suspended between breaths, suspended between the promise of rigid tradition and the murmur of dreams waiting to unfurl. It is here that the film's deepest theme, mortality's paradoxical kinship with love, takes root, weaving itself into every cobblestone, every flicker of lantern light. Victor Van Dort's first tentative footsteps toward the church are not merely steps toward a wedding. They are footsteps toward the threshold of life's fragile ceremony. The ornate bridal rehearsals, with their white ribbons and gilded trimmings, shimmer like a promise of perfection, yet their very precision betrays an undercurrent of stifled yearning, as though each pleated hem were a sigh of sacrifice. In the meticulous choreography of the guests, one discerns the weight of societal expectation, the way ritual can gild the cage as much as sanctify the union. Victor's trembling hand, rehearsing his vow in the hush behind closed doors, embodies the way tradition can both cradle and constrict the human heart. When the botched rehearsal spills into the old cemetery, the film's symbolism unfurls like mist across the gravel. There, among weathered headstones and iron gates mottled with rust, the boundary between life and death thins as though it were tissue paper. Emily's skeletal hand, reaching from the earth, is more than a ghastly trick of fate. It is the embodiment of love's endurance beyond the grave, the theme that death does not sever bonds but transmutes them. The wedding ring, a circle without end, gleams in Victor's palm both as an emblem of promise and as a symbol of entrapment. When he slides it onto Emily's bony digit, he binds his soul to a domain he does not yet understand, illustrating how promises can tether us to unseen worlds. In that single gesture, the film asserts that vows hold power beyond ceremony, that the binding force of love can fracture the barrier separating two realms. As Victor is escorted into the underworld by lantern light and indigo fog, the motif of light becomes a recurring code for understanding and transformation. The lantern itself, swaying between their hands, carries the dual symbolism of revelation and guidance. Its flickering glow illuminates tombstones etched with names, each one a story of a life that dared to hope and then slipped into memory. For Victor, the lantern's warmth is a comfort in the alien stillness of death's domain. For Emily, it is a reminder that her longing was once as vital as breathing. Here, Burton's palette of teal and aquamarine suffuses the air, and the film's theme of life amid decay finds visual echo in glowing lantern halos cutting through the haze. The lantern light becomes a metaphor for empathy, the capacity to see beyond outward form and connect with the pulse that once throbbed beneath Emily's translucent skin.